Welcome, everyone, to this office hours on the first 100 days of our nation's president. I kid. The first 100 days, survive and thrive as a new business owner. My name is Will Smith, and I'm the host of the podcast Acquiring Minds. And today's session is with Chelsea Wood. Chelsea is, of course, the co-founder and managing director of Acquisition Lab. Most of you probably know by now, but if not, the Lab is a cohort-based education community for people serious about buying a business. Many successful graduates of the Lab have appeared on Acquiring Minds, including just last week, Lucas Phillips, a great episode. He talks quite a bit about the Lab in there if you want to check that out. So today's topic, a successful transition from seller, previous owner to you, is a delicate and high stakes process, as you all know. And it's also a subject near and dear to Chelsea's own heart. So she's got a great presentation planned for us. We use the Q&A function of Zoom to ask questions. Chelsea will give the presentation. You can ask questions while she's doing it, but really we devote a good chunk at the end of her presentation to the Q&A section. At any rate, use the Q&A to communicate with us. We are recording the session. As always, you'll receive a link to the recording by email in the next day or two. And then finally, a couple links in the chat here. One is to, oh, sorry, everybody. Here I am. Not just a hovering voice. That first link is a special link for Acquiring Minds listeners, Acquiring Minds webinar attendees. It's to download the Acquisition Lab's Acquisition Insights mini course that otherwise costs $100. It's free at that link. And then Chelsea's LinkedIn. So connect with Chelsea on LinkedIn. She's putting out good content. Keep in touch with her. And that's it. Chelsea, please.
Thanks. All right, I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can see it. Are we good?
Got it.
All right, perfect. So for anyone that doesn't know me, I am an industrial organizational psychologist. And so if you've attended any of my prior sessions, they tend to be two different things. Number one, I try to be very practical in my advice and tactical so that you actually can walk away and execute on the things that we talk about. But there's almost always some psychology thrown in because, you know, it's basically my DNA at this point. And so this topic is one, it's honestly literally why Walker convinced me to build the lab for him. 5 years ago, actually, on Monday was our anniversary. And so it's because I really feel passionately about trying to lessen the impact of change of ownerships to small businesses. Right when Walker asked me to build the lab with him, my mom had just gone through her fifth buyout of the company she worked for. She was laid off for a fifth time. And at this point, she was in her late 60s and it forced retirement because it was very hard. Well, she didn't get a job after that, right? And so making this transition is just a very, very personal point to me. And so you'll see, I tried to be, there's a lot to talk about in the first 100 days, and I do 20 minutes of content for you guys. And so I'm going to give you a framework. And then I want to talk a little bit about some resources that I'll provide afterwards. And the copy of the slides are going to be sent out, obviously. But the first thing I think is really, really important, and it's not tactical, but I just want to make sure we're all on the same page, is that culture still eats strategy for breakfast. 20 years after graduating with my master's degree, and this is still the case every day. And the reason that I start this conversation with you guys is because culture is ultimately going to determine how you succeed or how you fail. I don't think anyone at this stage in our careers would argue that engaged employees, a strong organizational culture is helpful, right? Everyone here is going to be trying to get the business to perform better, that you're going to be trying to get higher revenues, and your primary concern is turnover, right? You don't want to lose the institutional knowledge that you are acquiring, right? And so I didn't think it was possible to talk about this topic without making sure that we're tying it back to how important it is that you're breeding a culture of engagement and a healthy culture, right? And so these are just some quick statistics. I went to check my old statistics because I used to do these talks, you know, for a living with big companies, and it's still all true, right? And so if you have companies and you're wanting to perform at the best, my master's dissertation was on organizational commitment behaviors. And the way that you get those behaviors, right, that turns into retention and your employees having more of an ownership mindset is you engage them in the stuff that's happening around them. And so I think it's really important. This is Chelsea's definition of culture. It's how I used to explain it to all of my clients. Culture is a byproduct of how you choose to operate. And so in your first 100 days, you are laying the foundation for the culture of the organization that you're taking over. And so I've started this to basically say, I want you to think about everything we talk about that you're going to be doing in the first 100 days and just every day after that to understand the unintended consequences of the choices that you're making. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about this structure, right? So when I talk about the first 100 days, this is kind of how I group it. And I'll say this at the end, but I'll say it right now. It's really important that you recognize that this is not linear. You might hit stabilizing in day 72, and that's okay. Well, actually, you should be stabilizing right away, but you know what I mean? Like these are just guardrails, but it's okay if it's not following exactly these timetables, but this just gives you a framework to operate in. And so the first section I want to talk about is your first day, right? And I think it's really important that all of your efforts focus on instilling security in your workforce and confidence in execution. And so you need to make sure that you're reassuring your employees because, again, small businesses, there's risk spread across your workforce. And when it's a small workforce, it's high risk, right? Because you lose one employee, it's a substantial impact to your business. And so the first thing you want to do is establish yourself as a leader, right? Make sure that they feel like they can trust you. You want to be very open and honest about what you're saying. And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about that in a second. But the other pieces, so that's kind of from a high level perspective around the organization, like the health of the organization and the workforce. But then there's also tactical stuff you need to be getting done, right? So day one, you're going to be firing and rehiring all of your employees with the exception of stock sales. And so there's a lot of tactical paperwork and things that you have to get done, and there's specific timeframes that they all have to be done by. But I think the backbone of you being able to do this well is being able to communicate effectively. And so I started out this deck being very tactical, but then I realized there needs to be some foundational skills that you incorporate in order to execute on this well. And so this is a tool that I used to use with executive teams when they were preparing for a transaction. And it's how I kind of frame communication, right? So this is how you communicate with your workforce with a goal of retaining them. And so I call it the STAR method. You want to be sympathetic in your messaging. And so you need to always think about what's in it for them. How are they being impacted? And you need to address that up front. You want to be very transparent in your communication. And that means admitting when you don't have all the answers. If you're not sure if you're going to make a change, don't say you're not going to make a change, right? You can say it hasn't been ruled out yet. You want to be very accurate with what you're sharing. And so it's really important that you're not sharing half-truths. And you want to be very robust in how you choose to communicate with your employees. Most people need to hear things multiple times and multiple different methods in order for it to really sink in. And so it's really important that you use written and oral communication, that you have things, hanging up. And this goes for any workforce, right? The communication methods that are effective for one workforce might differ from another, but they still need to be multiple platforms. This is a tool that I use with all executive teams that I worked with, no matter the size of the company. A message, and I honestly used this back when I was coaching for operational performance improvement early in my career. Message mapping is a tool that you use to ensure that you are communicating in a streamlined and effective manner. And you're, again, touching all of the points that I talked about in that STAR method. And so you want to have your central message, which is the business is transitioning ownership. You want to talk about why it's happening. You want to talk about how it's going to impact the stakeholder. So you would do this for each stakeholder group that you're talking about, how it's going to impact them, how you are going to address it, whatever their primary concerns are, and then what they need to do moving forward. And so this is just a helpful tool. I've used it in so many different frameworks. It's not just about the transaction. Any organizational change that you do, this is a great tool. So I would file it away if I were you. So the key actions that you're taking on day one is you're announcing the transition. setting expectations. Typically that's a live meeting, a town hall of some kind. If you have a remote workforce, then obviously it would be virtual. You want to confirm that everything is connected. So you want to make sure that the bank accounts, so the payroll, the insurance, everything is starting to kind of transition over appropriately. That employee transition is really, really critical, especially with the I-9 verification and payroll setup. And the last thing is you just want to make sure that everything's secure, right? You've changed passwords, you've made sure that the security protocols are still secure. It's really important, in my opinion. I took an oath to do no harm when I got my master's, and I take it really seriously. And so I know that you'll hear people in this space telling you to go in and tell everybody that nothing's going to change. You're just here to, you respect the way things have historically done. And so don't say that unless it's the truth, because everything you communicate with your employees starting from day one builds contracts with your employees, right? So they're going to sign the employment agreement. That's your employment contract. But the bigger, more important thing that directly impacts retention and engagement and satisfaction is actually psychological contracts that you create. And so when you say something and then you violate it with your actions, it breaks psychological contracts. And that break of psychological contracts is actually what gets turnover, right? And dissatisfaction and just the negative momentum in a company that can sabotage your success. I used this from another webinar that I did recently because I just think it's a really important thing for you to leverage when you're communicating with your employees, especially at the very beginning. Again, when we talk about communicating in multiple ways, having this visual representation of what it's moving from and how it's going to look moving forward is really important. And so making sure they understand how their pay dates are impacted, how the pay rates are impacted, any kind of changes to the benefit coverage, if they're going to have to start searching for new doctors, if you're changing things about their operating hours or how they request time off, make it very clear because nobody likes a lack of clarity, right? A lack of clarity is what breeds distrust. And so if you're going to make a change, own the change, explain why, and move on. But don't hide the changes, right? You won't succeed in the long run because you're going to undermine your entire workforce. So that's just day one, right? And so there's a lot that goes into successfully executing on day one. I know, Will, it's a lot. But there's a lot of prep that goes into doing this well, right? That I think that people don't think about because they're waiting for their papers to be signed, and it's almost like an afterthought. So that's why I'm trying to cover this now, so that you guys will be a little bit more proactive in preparing for that first conversation. And it's also really important that it's you, right? Like I heard recently about a seller that wanted to announce it without the buyer there. And I was like, well, that sounds like a horrible idea, right? You want it to show that you guys are unified. And so don't ever let that happen. Okay, so then the first 30 days is all about stabilization, right? And observing. Your top priority is to make sure all the pipes work, right? You need to make sure that nothing broke with the transition, like we talked about, because at some point in that 30 days, you're going to have your first payroll cycle. And you do not want to be this guy when people don't get their first paychecks accurately. It is the worst place to be as a business owner, and it just sets a horrible tone, and it happens so often. I can't tell you, I supported, good Lord, at a corporate level, I supported, 15 deals, and I can tell you a lot of times payroll was messed up, even in big deals. And so do what you can to proactively ensure that you make the payroll system your priority, because what you don't want to have happen is this to be your employee, where they knew from the moment that this happened that they absolutely wanted you out of their life, right? You were unreliable, you jeopardized their security, and they instantly are going to start looking for another job. That is everybody's biggest concerns. And so make that transition period your top priority. So again, stabilization is all about making sure your accounts, your systems are all working. You're working on building relationships, establishing credibility. You are starting to get your arms around operations and the transition, right, from the seller. And this is your opportunity to start identifying quick wins, right, and to really stabilize the business. So in an effort to kind of help you guys, because I realize we can't work with every buyer because we do have a low acceptance rate, but I really do want this to happen better. In the world, I created this toolkit. It's actually an excerpt from an ebook and a toolkit that I've been writing with my company Insitesify. And so it's more of a tactical, like step-by-step process for everything. And I had a conversation about sharing this. I'm not comfortable blasting it out to everybody. But if you want this toolkit, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or email me and I'll send it to you. It is proprietary to my company. I'm leasing it to the lab members so that they can use it. But it is much more tactical, right? And so in your first 30 days, you're going to start conducting your one-on-one meetings with your employees. You're going to start reviewing relationships and make sure that you understand the risks of all of the partnerships that your company has. Again, a lot of this stuff should be kind of float over from your due diligence. And so make sure that there's not a hard disconnect between due diligence and you transitioning. You want to make sure that you're bridging the gap between what you learned and building a plan for how you need to address it in your first 100 days. There's a period of time where you're just kind of twiddling your thumbs, waiting for the documents to be signed. This is a great time to start planning for this stuff. Start looking and understanding the culture and understand kind of where you're starting at and potentially where you need to go before you make any changes. If you're not familiar with Adam Grant, he is an industrial organizational psychologist who I just think shares really, really insightful messages on in social media. I don't actually follow anyone on social media like habitually because I hate social media, but I will always look to see what Adam's posting. And he posted this, and I just think it's so important for you guys to recognize that the people in the room are typically going to be the most valuable to you. And if you come in and you come off and you're trying to come off as, and this is a misstep, I think, for first-time buyers, but more so anyone that is inexperienced with leadership. If you come in trying to breed confidence by exercising authority and like trying to show how smart you are, it will often kind of counterbalance you. But if you're able to kind of be curious and leverage the expertise from your workforce and ask questions, that is typically where you will get the most value from your interactions, right? Because realistically, you guys, you know nothing about the business. And so you wouldn't even know what to fix, even if you think you do, right? You know what could potentially benefit based on the preliminary information you gathered about the company, but the people running the business are really going to know what's going to work and what's not going to work. So don't underestimate their value. In Chelsea's opinion, these are your first 30-day critical success factors. And in case you wonder why I say Chelsea's opinion, I always want to be clear that I'm not representing the acquisition lab with my opinions. The acquisition lab was never intended to be an echo chamber for one person. All of us as advisors have our own opinions. And so these are my opinions. But if you asked another advisor, they'd probably give you their own critical success factors. And so for me, the most important things in your first 30 days is your first town hall and your communication, that payroll, and then that you do not disrupt benefit coverage, right? You need to make sure that the policy is being assigned appropriately. You need to make sure that you've been very clear with how your employees or your workforce is communicated, and you need to make sure that everything is executed appropriately. This is like in Chelsea's opinion, this is basics. Like you F this up, you're really jeopardizing your transition, and you're not going to fail, but it's going to take you a long time to rebuild trust when you screw up these things, right? And so if you want to do this really well, then you want to nail these pieces. So the next period is kind of that 31 to 99 days. And this is where you start to shift your focus and you're understanding operations a little bit more, and you're starting to see ways that you can optimize. The key here is that you're being very thoughtful, right? You're engaging your workforce in your plans, you're developing plans, and you're not just willy-nilly changing things because you saw on social media that all companies need to be updated into the digital age and start running ads, right? Like you want to be very intentional. Not every business will benefit from the strategies going viral on social media. And so you want to focus on building your infrastructure to ensure that if you were to successfully scale, that you could support that, right? And so this is your time to really optimize for growth and figure out what your long-term vision is. So your one-on-one meetings will happen in the first 30 days. But I think it's important to recognize that your one-on-one meetings could be two-part, right? regardless of when you choose to do them, whether you like depend, and it does depend a lot on how many employees there are and what the infrastructure is, but you want to establish a rapport with your employees, right? You want to share why you were interested in buying the company and what some of your just personal insights are, but you want to explore their journey with the company, get to know them on a personal level. You want to help them understand how they are connected to your overall strategy and why they're really important. But the big thing about these meetings, so whether it's your initial one-on-one or a supplemental one-on-one at the 30-day mark, just to check in, is to start asking foundational questions about what works well and what can be improved. And then also to get an opportunity to identify growth plans for your workforce. And so understand if your workforce has a strong interest in cross training, right? Maybe one of your employees wants to be a leader someday. You want to understand the unique drivers of each of your employees, because this will also help you gauge if everyone needs to stay, right? There's a lot of data collection that happens in this first 90 days that helps you understand the health of the organization as well as the workforce. So I really like this diagram because I want you all to recognize that as a business owner, when you close, you are sitting on a gold mine, and that gold mine is your employees, right? Your employees are going to know the low-hanging fruit that you can tweak to optimize for efficiencies and potentially grow. And so this is an exercise I used to use in when I was focused on operational improvement, doing leadership coaching. And so it's the if you had a magic wand exercise, right? It's very, very easy for pretty much anyone to understand. So it crosses all industries, all kind of professional level of your workforce. And so it's one thing that you would continue doing, right? Because it's working really well. What's one thing that you would stop doing because it makes your job harder or it makes us less effective? And then what's one thing that you would start doing because it would make it easier to do your job or it would make us more effective? Pretty much every employee will be able to tell you this because we all know it, right? You could think about it in your own company or your own jobs right now in your head. And so this is a really great exercise for you to get a short list of low-hanging fruit. And it's amazing how quickly you can make an impact on your company by just removing the barriers that were there previously for the workforce that you acquired. So this is one thing that I just think is really important to recognize. Historically, when I have conversations with buyers, I think everyone's kind of aware that culture is a thing, right? And if there's a quote unquote bad culture, so maybe there was a toxic leader historically, then everyone recognizes, well, this is an opportunity for me to do culture change. And so it's actually beneficial. But culture change historically is a very top-down approach. And so you need to make sure that you're not setting forward, like, I want this to be this type of culture. And so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do all this stuff and put this stuff in place, right? Culture change initiatives traditionally fail and because you don't get buy-in, right? Culture alignment needs to be a bottom-up approach where you're working with your workforce and understanding your supplier or your customer needs, and you're really building a culture that is in alignment with the service you're providing, right? And the brand that you want to have as an employer. And it really leverages your employees so that they also own the culture, right? That is the hands down the best way to do this. Any transaction that we studied in business school or in graduate programs, typically when they do transactions really well, it's because they took more of a cultural alignment approach and less of a culture change approach. You have this opportunity to really bring your employees along for the ride of this transition of ownership. You can make that choice, or you can make it feel like it's happening to them, right? Their company was bought, they have a new leader, they don't know what's going to happen. I mean, you can only imagine what the internal dialogue is in that situation. And so you want to engage them as much as possible. The key actions in this space is you want to make sure that your working capital true up happens in alignment with your APA clauses, like however they're written. You want to make sure that you're not forgetting to do that working capital true up and any financial adjustments that need to happen. You want to make sure that you're starting to track KPIs so that you can actually monitor the success of anything that you're implementing. This is a good opportunity to execute on surveys with your workforce if you've never done that, if you're really trying to collect data. Identify bottlenecks, like, right, so that you can start doing those little tweaks. And sometimes the bottlenecks are seen by observing. So some business owners will go in and observe every position in their company. And they'll build relationships with their members or with their employees, and they'll be able to identify some challenges, right? And remove those barriers. That's really your goal as a business owner, is to remove barriers for your workers. And then start to evaluate the health of the workforce, right? Does everybody need to stay? Are there some potential people that maybe need to go? It's really beneficial, and I don't talk about it in this presentation, but for you to understand who your informal leaders are. And so who in your company is a leader without a title, meaning that if you can get them on board with a change you want to make, typically you'll have a much higher success rate and a higher adoption rate. And so you can kind of start to observe that during this time. So as we kind of talk about pivoting into the 100+ days, right? Whatever that time period is, once you've stabilized, revenue is settled, you've got a pretty good handle on operations, you've started to make some of those optimization tweaks so the business is running a little bit smoother. Now it's time for you to focus on developing your plans for future growth, right? And so really thinking about, from a long-term perspective, where do we want to go, right? You want to focus on thinking about business development. Can you diversify your revenue streams? Should you be potentially growing through acquisition? What workforce do you have? What workforce needs do you have in order to actually execute on your plans? And so in this stage is when you're going to start looking at your leadership structure. You're going to start refining processes and procedures. You're going to look into your business expansion strategy. I would not recommend you. Most people aren't ready to execute on an growth through acquisition strategy until about a year to 18 months in. And so I'm saying 100 days, but it's okay if it's actually like 365 days after closing. There's a lot that happens in this time frame, and I don't know that I've ever seen one act as quickly as the models that we use provide. But saying like this is your first 300 days isn't as catchy, so we all still say your first 100 days. And then the most important part is that you have a continuous feedback loop with your employees, so that you understand that you're able to be more nimble, right? That you're never logged out or kind of inundated by historical performance, right? Like, well, this is how we've always done it, so we have to do it that way. If you keep that feedback loop, you'll be able to optimize. So I saw this on social media a long time ago about startups. And I just kept thinking about it last night as I was finalizing this presentation. And I feel like social media right now is making it look like you decide you want to buy a business, you buy a business, and then you're like lying on the beach while it's printing money. That is not, absolutely not what it looks like, right? What it really looks like is actually what's on the right, right? And the same goes for if you looked at the one on the left as the 30, 60, 90, 100-day, like it's not a linear path, right? It is much more like what's on the right. Right, you're gonna have starts, you're gonna have, moments in the fetal position where things aren't working and you're second guessing everything you've ever done, but it will settle down, right? You will make it out. I feel like if that's not happening, you are probably a unicorn, right? Like if you just think about the change cycle, which I think I've introduced on a prior call, it's a normal part of the human experience to second guess yourself when you execute a change. And you're just going to be constantly changing, and you're going to be operating from a place of insecurity because you're in a new environment that you're not, fully on top of. You're not going to be performing in a way that you're normally comfortable with. And so it is going to look a lot like what's on the right. And I just want everyone to expect that, right? It's going to take a while before you start to go up, right? We typically see stabilization about 18 months. And so I just wanted to include this so that I could combat some of the lack of some of the glamorization, right, that's happening in the space. And so whether the things that we talked about happen at 90 days or 360, it's just really important that you focus on what you're trying to achieve, stay focused on the employees, the community you serve. The path doesn't have to look like this. It's really critical that you trust yourself, and remember why you're doing what you're doing, and look to, anyone in your network to get support when it is rough. I can't tell you how many calls in that first 6 months from our employees post-close, because things happen. Like we've had members close, and within the first month, like their primary vehicle's engine explodes. We had another member find out that there was people working for the company that they were not comfortable being there given their background. We've had members by companies where the entire workforce wasn't actually working. And it wasn't caught in due diligence because people don't check time cards. We've had other members by companies where the people were, had intoxicated employees as a problem. Like, you will encounter challenges that will prevent you from doing all the things that I said on these slides. And so just have faith that you're doing it for the right reasons, and rely on the people that, support you the most. We always say in the lab that the goal is buying a business, but not at the expense of making a mistake. And so hopefully the things that I've outlined in this presentation will support you in doing it a little bit more thoughtfully, and get you closer to retaining your top talent. Like Will said earlier, as a thank you for attending, you're welcome to the Acquisition Insights course for free, acquisitionlab.com/acquiring minds. I told Will that I'm comfortable if you guys want a copy of this toolkit. It is not for distribution, so please don't share it. I'm doing it honestly just so that we can try to make a positive impact, but it is part of a work in progress for me as I'm working through this toolkit with my company. And so email me directly and I'll send you that toolkit. You can ask for it on LinkedIn too, if that's easier for you. And then if you're interested in exploring if the lab's a good fit for you, or if you want to talk acquisition strategy, drop your email address in the Q&A and I'll have Julio reach out and schedule a call. I love talking about strategy, but I will tell you, yesterday, I'm getting more people coming in without any knowledge of what the lab is, after doing back-to-back calls with other people in the program. And we don't do sales calls. I still run our strategy calls with the applicants. And I have one member that runs calls too, and it really is a consultative approach. And so I have consistently thrown people off. Because I'm not there to sell the lab. I'm here to help you think through if what you're trying to do is achievable or not. And if we can help, that's amazing. If we can't, then I'll tell you we can't. But apparently it's very shocking to people, especially if they're doing back-to-back calls. And so just as a heads up, it is not a sales call, it is a strategy call. And so there is some thought that I need you to put into it in that discussion so I can figure out if what you're trying to do is doable. That's it, Will. I can't hear you, Will, if you're talking.
Thank you. Can't get my video on, can't get my mic on.
It's
You'd think
okay.
I've done one of these before. Great presentation, Chelsea. I have questions. The audience has questions. Just to reiterate what Chelsea said, if you want to book a strategy call with Chelsea or Julio, put your email in the Q&A as a question, drop it in there. That will all be saved and given to Chelsea and her team at the end of this. Also got questions throughout. Will the slides be shared?
Always.
The slides of the presentation will be, not the toolkit. We're going to return to the toolkit in a second. And then somebody wanted me to reshare the links that I'd put in the very beginning of the presentation. You should see links there in your chat. One is to Chelsea's LinkedIn, connect with her there. And the other is to the Acquisition Insights course, which you can get free. It's a mini course. They sell it for $100. You guys can get it for free. Maybe, yeah, okay. And then that toolkit, you have to email Chelsea for it. There's her email address at the bottom of the screen, chelsea@buythenbuild.com. Chelsea, would you indulge me and put the full, actually share the toolkit? You on a couple of slides, there was screenshots, but share this document. It's a 10-page, 12-page document, and it's very comprehensive.
Yeah, which, I mean, everyone knows business. This is my proprietary stuff. And so that's why I asked that you not share it. But the way I just put it together based off of things that I've used in the past, and things that I had developed, but it's a 100-day checklist. And so, can you see my screen? Am I sharing it?
Yeah.
Okay. And so I did my best to kind of break down the key things that you'll want to execute on. And then, any kind of just tips as far as what the timeline is, like how quickly you need to do I-9 verifications and things like that.
It's really granular. I mean, you can see here, week 1, week 2, week 3, everything from, I mean, look how specific some of this stuff is, the audit all vendor and service contracts, I-9 stuff, check inventory and supply chain. I mean, it's great. Now, of course, all of this stuff it's not perfectly generalizable. Every business has its idiosyncrasies. So you can't use this as your absolute
Yeah.
only thing. Still got to bring your brain. But
Yeah, it's
this is
not
an incredible
comprehensive
starting
at
point.
all. You should
Yeah,
be getting
I use that word, wrong word to use. It's not comprehensive. But
no.
for a generic document and a starting point, it's incredibly rich.
Yeah, and so you would definitely want to rely on your legal team as well as your diligence team with some other things that you need to be considering. But these are the main things that I always thought about. Um, and so that's the checklist. But then I also have a communication tool in here to kind of help you think through how to make that announcement and what you need to be thinking about, both oral and written if you want to send an email out or do a letter of some kind. But this is also the talking points that you would use. Um, I was like, it was my job to prepare these talking points for our executive teams when we would do a transaction. And so I just relied on similar things that we would cover. It's the same stuff you guys want to be covering. And so I just gave you a breakdown. By no means should you use this verbatim. These are my words. They should be your own. But it does give you a framework to function off of.
Yeah.
I included the message mapping tool because I really think it's so fundamentally critical. I've used it pretty consistently throughout my career in a multitude of ways. I've even used it with our family. And so I think it's just a good tool to have in general. It's just really good for being able to communicate effectively, in
Yeah.
my opinion. And then I have the one-on-one meeting guide and question bank that you can use for your one-on-ones with your employees. And I think the last thing is process improvement questions that you can ask when you're doing your follow-up meetings. Just some more pointed questions so you can start to develop an idea of areas that can be optimized. You can do it in survey form, you can do it in interview form. It really depends on what's appropriate for your audience. Some workforces have an aversion to surveys, some you can't use computer, like not all employees have access to a computer. And so it's really, you need to understand your workforce to determine what strategy works best for you.
Great. So just to follow the advice that Chelsea is giving you all to over communicate. I'm over communicating that to get your hands on that toolkit, you email Chelsea at buythenbuild.com. I'm keep seeing that question, Chelsea at buythenbuild.com, and ask her for it, and she'll send it to you. It's not for public consumption. It is not going out to everybody that registered for this webinar. It's not meant to just be blasted out, but she'll give it to you for free. These slides are going to be included in the email and in this recording. Okay, Chelsea. So bunch of questions at the top of the presentation about payroll. It's so no room for error. It's such a litmus test for you as new owner. Can you start the process before you take ownership?
Sometimes.
I guess it's up to the seller. Is that kind of up to the seller?
Mm-hmm. What works really well is if they already have a payroll provider and you can kind of just adopt the same payroll provider, it provides a much more streamlined process. Some of these small businesses that run it manually. And so there's some thought process there. It also depends on when you time your closing. Like if your closing is timed in the middle of their payroll cycle, that can cause some challenges. And so there's some conversations that you can have with your accountant and be smarter than me, your attorney, about the implications of closing in the middle of a pay period, whether or not you can continue to run a pay cycle as is, or if you have to split it. The least amount of impact you can have on their pay, the better. And so if that means timing your closing date or your transition or when payroll transitions over to be in alignment with their payroll cycle, the better. And so if you don't have a payroll provider in mind, or you have an industry, or you've never heard of a professional employment organization, I would highly encourage you to educate yourself on professional employment organizations, because they will take all that for you, and they're very skilled at managing transactions and making sure that these things go well. And that's companies like Gusto, TriNet, TriNet. Thinking TRICARE, but that's the military benefits. TriNet is a PEO. Bamboo HR, I think, is another PEO.
Aspen
Insperity,
HR, sponsor of
Aspen
Acquiring
HR.
Minds.
There you
Aspen
go.
HR.
Call Aspen HR.
Owned and run by a searcher. works for a lot of searchers. So Mark Sinatra at Aspen HR. Thank you for indulging me, Chelsea.
Yeah, so call Aspen. But the point is, if you can have a partner where they can be brought in early, right? Because you'll identify in due diligence who their providers are, what their pay periods are, and all that stuff as part of your HR operational due diligence. You could start transitioning it, right? Because you could make the decision to stay with their payroll provider or to onboard a new one. Correct.
It seems like this would be something that as a best practice, you would push your seller to do. Like, hey, seller, we need to carve out 2-3 hours ahead of day one for us to really, really choreograph the payroll transition because it's so important, et cetera, et cetera. I actually don't hear people do that, but it seems like they should.
Well, it doesn't have to happen. Again, it depends on when this is why this stuff is so hard. It's so nuanced. It depends on where your closing falls in the payroll cycle, right? Like you do need to figure it out so that you understand what the implications are on the transition of ownership. But it's possible that the old owner can just continue to run payroll for the first pay cycle while you onboard a new one. But like it should be a conversation that happens in diligence. Right. So everybody is doing their operational due diligence. This is a core component. Benefits and payroll are a part of your operational due diligence. And so having a conversation about what the transition of that looks like can start in due diligence, right?
Okay,
It is literally a due diligence item. And so that also might mean that you're lining up a payroll provider of your own if they don't have one, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Gosh, they don't have a payroll provider. Wow.
And it happens, right? Aunt Susie might be running payroll and they might be
Yeah.
doing paper checks, right? And that's okay too. It's just important that you understand how people are being paid and that you continue to do the same thing until enough time to build trust to make a change that they trust, right? Like you don't touch people's money. That's like the number one way to piss everybody off. And so you can make changes over time, but like at first you don't want to touch benefits or pay. That will be everybody will go on alarm when that gets impacted.
Is there a best practice around giving immediate raises, blanket raises, or having a blanket comment that's like no raises for 6 months or for 6 weeks until we evaluate everything?
I really hate giving you guys consulting answers, but I find myself doing it a lot on these calls. It depends, right? There's no best practice because it totally just depends on what the business is, what the health is, what their compensation strategy has been up to this point. You can say I won't be touching anyone's pay for 6 months while I evaluate the health of the organization. Like I go back to what I said in the presentation. You can say whatever the hell you want, just make sure it's the truth. Right. And so you can't say I'm not giving anyone raises. And then Bob, who's head of sales, comes to you and says, I'm going to leave and I'm taking 75% of the accounts with me. And then you give Bob a raise. Right. And so I think it's just really important that you're mindful about the intent, like the unintended consequences of the choices that you're making. I like the idea of giving all employees a little boost if you can handle it. Right. But like, I remember getting a raise when I worked for corporate America, like our increase that year, they didn't do merit increases. That's a whole nother conversation, but we all got raises. It was a nickel. Will, don't give me a nickel raise. Like that's just insulting. And so
Yeah.
there is a line that you have to walk where it shows that you care. But if they're already being compensated well, then you're setting a precedent. So you have to be careful there too. Right. And so I guess it just depends.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to ask you another question, and that's going to be your answer to this question as well. Lots of questions about best practices around retaining or keeping the owner in the business. How long? Let's start with that.
And so let me be clear, it depends is because all of this is so nuanced. It's why you can't teach how to buy a business in a course, right? Like there needs to be conversations about the business. That's why we have the lab. And so to answer that, just as a caveat, if I keep saying that, I'm sorry. But in this scenario, it depends on the financing, right? So if you have SBA financing, they need to get out in 12 months if it's a full buyout, right? If you retain equity, then they can stay longer, but you have to understand, again, the unintended consequences of keeping them around and how that will impact the transition of leadership, right? Like, can you imagine you get hired for a job, it's a replacement position. So Bob, who used to do the job, is still there and he gets to stay there while you're also doing the job. How well do you think it's going to be to get people and by the way, Bob has been there for 27 years. He's actually
Yeah.
the creator of that role that you're taking on, right? So
Yeah.
how hard is it going to be to get people to come to you now, new person in that role, instead of Bob, who they've come to for the last 26 years? And so to me, involving the seller and letting them stay sounds great in theory, but it creates an undercurrent of like a resistance to the transition, right? There's a
Yeah.
lack of clarity, there's confusion, there's a difficulty letting go. So in not great cases, there's actually someone undermining your every thought, right? They don't agree with what you're doing. And so they still have their ties to their employees, and they can actually undermine you, right? And prevent you from being as successful as you could be if you just cut them and gave the time that business ownership deserves from your schedule.
A few follow-up thoughts to that. This is from my interviews, what I see is that it's very hard to predict how well it will work. To Chelsea's point about how it can go wrong, and there can be undermining, and the old owner is territorial, and the confused hierarchy. So, but it also
It's a
can. There
risk.
are cases where it works as well. I mean, you'll have. I've heard a number of stories where the seller didn't want to leave the business, still had a few years in them, but wanted to return to being a technician or foreman or whatever. They just wanted to do the field work. They didn't want to deal with being an owner. And so they just wanted to stay in and go back to being a manager, an individual contributor. And so in that case, I guess it worked.
I would
So
argue
it's
though, if
very hard to. I think it's very hard to predict. Other people, other cases I've heard, the buyer. Sorry, Chelsea. The buyer pushes for the seller to stay in as long as possible because they want to download the seller's brain, and then find out after a week or two, wow, the seller is unproductive in a million ways. This isn't working, and they want them out ASAP. So it's hard to predict. Sorry.
no, and I was just gonna say, I would argue that if there's employees um, in the company where the owners stay on as technical people, I would argue, again, I approach most things as an IO psychologist, right? So like, sure, that might work, but I promise it's probably not working if you actually talk to the employees for a multitude of reasons, right? Like, how comfortable are they going to be talking about things that didn't work when the owner is still there, right? Out
Yeah.
of respect for that person. And so it can work. We always say at the lab, our goal is to help you do this in the least risky way possible. I just don't think that it allows you to be as effective as you could possibly be. I don't mean to suggest it won't work. There's a gazillion things that work, right? I just don't know that it'll work as well as it could
Mm-hmm.
if they weren't there, right? Because there's just a lot, right, where there you want free reign to do what you want with the company so that it can achieve the goals that you set forth. And keeping somebody there that has deep ties to how it was previously run could be very inhibiting, I think is the right word.
Mm-hmm. One thing you're touching on, and it's never even occurred to me. We've talked many times about how the employee, say the seller stays around, the hierarchy becomes a little confused. Do they report to you? Do they report to the seller? And I always think about that from a top-down approach, like how you communicate that. But it's probably quite awkward for the
Correct.
employees too, because to your point about disloyalty, they might feel like, if they like their boss, their old owner, or they're scared of them or something, if they start going to you instead of the owner, it's going to make them feel weird. And you could just feel how you as one of the staff would feel kind of uncomfortable doing that. So I've never thought about it from the employee perspective, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
But I'm glad you did. That's the point of this conversation.
All right.
Hopefully everybody on this call now thinks about it that way, right? Because like if you want to retain your top talent, and I know you said people have questions about that, that's how you have to think, right? You have to think like an employee. You have to think about how they're going to feel going through this. That is the most valuable exercise you could possibly do.
Somebody's asking, are there any other retention strategies? Obviously, all of this is basically about retaining people, but I guess any specific tactical things like introducing a new benefit or the raise we've already talked about, or not giving a raise as we talked about, anything concrete where it's a best practice in terms of retaining people?
Every business is different, so it's hard to say, right? Because what sounds good may not actually work for your business. But I would say any positive improvement you can make based on how the company was previously run is typically perceived well. However, you could put swings in the conference rooms and pizzas out every day, and if you suck as a leader, they're going to leave. And so nothing you do is going to retain people if you don't ensure that you are a strong leader. And so I would say making sure that you're paying a fair market wage is really important. Understanding if your workforce has to have a second job to pay their bills is probably raises might be a great idea, right? I would say anything shy of, a lot of people use bonuses, retention bonuses. Anyone in this space will basically just tell you that just tells you the date you have to fill their position. And so you can use it. But again, you can pay them, but they'll still leave if it's not a good environment for them to be in. The other thing that's really good in small businesses that is lacking a lot of times from a retention perspective, from just a organizational psychology perspective, is having career ladders, right? Small businesses historically will not have career ladders because they're somewhat horizontal. And so any work you can do to provide a clear path of growth for your workforce will typically increase the organizational commitment behaviors that you're looking for. And that's kind of why I referenced getting to know them and understanding like what skills they want to develop, right? Where they see themselves, like what projects are interesting to them. Just giving them a chance to be engaged and leveraged with the assumption you're paying them appropriately. If you're not paying them appropriately, yes, do that first. And the other thing is introducing benefits, right? So I know a lot of small businesses won't do benefits, or introducing a benefit stipend where you'll help them pay for benefits if you're not going to be offering them can go a long way. All of these are options, but I don't know what's right for your company until you talk to me about it, right? And then
But introducing benefits does seem like a caveat, not in all cases, but that it would be more, that it would be beneficial in most cases because it's something like a blanket raise, but it's not quantifiable to the employees. And it's such a strong goodwill gesture.
yeah, it can create a pretty significant amount of overhead, which is why most people don't seem to do it. But if culture and growth and scaling is a priority for you, then establishing yourself as an employer of choice is really important. And paying well and having strong benefits and specifically signing up with a professional employment organization, is a really good way to poise yourself for growth because it gives you access to benefits at a cheaper rate than a small business typically. So anyone that doesn't know what a PEO is, they go to market as a collective of employees. And so they're able to leverage like all of their customers, clients or employees, and they go to like the insurance and they compete with very large companies. And so they get the same types of packages because they're basically saying we have 100,000 employees, right?
They're
And so
pooling the employee
they pool
bases
the
of all their
employees.
customers.
Correct. And so if you truly want to scale, like anyone that wants to grow through acquisition, in my opinion, should have a PEO. Right? Like, and the reason the reason I say PEO is PEO basically, if you can do it, is a shared risk model. So they co-employ your employees and they provide outsourced HR. So it gives you access to the size HR function of a lot of large companies. And so you have somebody whose job it is to develop professional development plans, right? They come in and do workshops with your leaders. It's somebody that works on employee relations and does handbooks and ensures that your payroll is executed in compliance with all of your legal regulations, right? When you have to terminate somebody, there's somebody that handles that for you. So it really gets you out of the HR function and ensures that you're poised for growth. And they also have recruiting functions that can help you with all that, but it also helps you mitigate risk.
Wow. I didn't realize that, that they do all of that.
And I don't know if all of them do that. Like, I don't know the one you mentioned, but the one I worked with, they had co-employment models.
Yeah, and that co-employment thing can be a little weird to wrap your head around. They become, at least legally, the employer or co-employer of your employees. It's kind of a weird arrangement. You just got to swallow that pill if you choose to use a PEO. Yep. For those, going back to questions here, Chelsea, for those with investors, how does investor management or board management fit into the communication plan for the first 100 days?
So same kind of thing, right? I don't know that you have to communicate with them the same way, because they're aware, right? They're your investors, so you notify them at closing, and then typically a 30-day update. I want to say probably written, but it depends on what you agree to with your investors, right? So typically, once you have investors and you have a formal agreement, you agree to a certain set of communication rules, right? Like you're going to do quarterly updates and like an annual board meeting or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Yeah.
So you would just want to make sure you're complying with that. But that message mapping tool I gave you is really helpful for all stakeholders.
Investors, now that I am one, like a lot of communication, the more the better. The reality also is that they are not always, this is now I'm not putting myself in the investor bucket when I say that, that not all investors always read all of your
Correct.
updates with super closely. They just like to, it signals to them how on top of it you are. And if they're curious, then they could read the update. But they are known to not always read all the updates and yet still want them from you. Nature of the beast. You should play that game if you want to have a good relationship with your investors, which you do.
Yep, agreed.
Couple questions about stock sales and how that, the way Wes puts it, alleviates the payroll and benefits transition issues because you're not having to move all that. It's already ongoing because you're stepping into an existing entity. Would that fact alone make it more worthwhile to consider doing a stock sale versus the blanket advice of do an asset sale?
I think stock sales are good in some cases and absolutely terrible in others. Right. So I don't want the fear of effing up someone's payroll to counterbalance the horrific amount of liability that can come from a stock sale. Right. So
Mhm.
like if you're buying a company that sells umbrellas, cool. Like stock sale all day long, fine, whatever, right? Assuming no like big issues from a litigation perspective, right? But there's not a lot of like organizational risk associated with the business itself, right? But let's say I'm buying an engineering company that does inspections on bridges. I don't want the risk associated with anything they effed up while they were owners and like any potential litigation tied to their work. And so not doing a stock sale is probably your only line of defense. Again, asset sales aren't pure protection either, right? There's still liability that everybody seems to dance across with asset too, but like you're taking on a really big amount of liability when you do a stock sale. One example being we had a member that uncovered that the prior owners had committed tax fraud. They had done their time. It was like 10 years ago. They cleaned up their act, quote unquote, whatever. You couldn't pay me enough money to do a stock sale with that company just because the owners had demonstrated questionable ethics by making the choice and going to prison for that choice, right? So like I think that you have to balance the risks, right? Like stock sales, you are opening yourself up for a lot of risk. And so I would say just plan better with the asset sale if it's a high risk industry or like if there's high potential long-term risk. Um, so I wouldn't say no, I wouldn't say like do a stock sale that it's better.
Just for that reason. Yeah.
Mm-mm.
Um, a recent guest, I'm forgetting which, talked about
How
how,
dare you?
yeah, sometimes they slip at 327 or whatever it is. Um, talked about how they negotiated with the seller to do a stock sale, but basically put it in indemnity protections into the APA so that basically if there is anything from deep dark history that comes to fore, there's a lawsuit of some kind, they're simply indemnified. Why isn't it as simple as that?
Because it's just not. I love it. Like that is one line of defense, but it's still your entity. You still own it. So there's still you can still be sued, right? You can still be held liable for it. I think reps and warranty insurance is a really great resource for folks to use for things that are unknown. So that if there is a lawsuit or something that happens that's high cost, you can kind of reconcile your expenses associated with it with that. Um, indemnifications are great in theory. I would love if have you had any of your attorneys talk about indemnifications that you can
Not directly. It may have been brought up, but they haven't done a webinar on the topic, which would be a great idea, actually.
Yeah, and so I'll let a lawyer talk about it, but like I have been in transactions since 2011. It is a risk mitigation strategy to indemnify in a legal agreement, but it's not a blanket indemnification. You still own the company. And so I love that, yes, it's there and it helps, but it's not a perfect protection, I guess is the best way I can say it. There's still risk because you own the company.
Okay. 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 We're at 2 minutes past the hour, so we're going to start wrapping up here, Chelsea. But so many questions we didn't get to. Somebody asks, I'd like to put the J, this is sort of related to transition. I'd like to put the J curve into my financial models.
Perfect.
What is the range, which you should, that's kind of a necessity. What is the range of probable, what is the range of probable to stress test that they should bracket? In other words, how much of a J curve, how much of a decline in revenue and profit should they put as a worst case scenario to demonstrate that it doesn't break the acquisition?
So for lab members, we have a break-even analysis tool that we say everyone should do, and you should do as far down until it breaks, right? And so it's hard to say. If I were in your shoes, I would do a historical analysis of what the performance was. I maybe look at the worst year they've ever had and model off of the worst year they ever had. As just because it's really, I could say 10% decline, but like that doesn't mean anything. What if a 10% volatility is normal for that market, right? So
Yeah.
I would say if I were in this person's shoes and I was looking at a listing, I would try to get as much historical performance as possible, not in a monthly download. That's too much for the seller to comply with. But I would try to get as much historical performance as possible, and I would model it based on the worst year possible. And if they didn't
Okay.
have one and they were like beautifully stable, which would be amazing, call me, I'll buy that. No, I'm just kidding. I would probably model, I would say a 25% decline in the first quarter, and then I would have it course correct slowly in the first, maybe not the first quarter. I guess I would do that like in the first 45 days because that's typically when the shock happens. But it's actually, this gets a little technical, guys, but like your business will start to decline during the closing period because of the distraction from the seller because they're working on stuff related to the business, I mean, to the deal. And so you're going to buy, typically what you'll see is the business will have a little bit of a decline in that period. And so like we're talking 5%, right? And so I would probably start modeling it from the month of closing into like a 5 and then maybe like a 10 like the following month, and then just kind of start to course correct back up. J curves typically don't last for a really long time, but I'd say at least the first 6 months, while all of that kind of, again, you're focusing on stabilization, right? So while all of that change is happening, it should stabilize by 6 months.
Well, and I think there's two kind of phases of the J curve we're talking about here. One is just cost related to the transition, but then the other longer one is new costs that are now permanent in the business because you have hired, 2 more people to take over what the seller was doing because they were doing the work of 3 people, put in an ERP, turned on digital marketing, all this new expense that's never going away. And that it permanently burdens the business. And you need to then crawl back out of that. That's the longer J curve.
So when I talk about J curve, to be clear, and I'm using it in the frame of reference that I was taught, I'm speaking purely about the change to revenue, right? Revenue historically will drop during a transition of any kind. And so everything that Will just said has to be built into your forecasts and your models. But when I'm talking about a J curve, I'm just talking about how revenue typically will drop. And then to your point, though, when you execute a change, it will drop again, right? J curve is directly tied to change initiatives. And so you might need to model a J curve historically, right, throughout your journey being a business owner based on your strategies. But like, if you're thinking about building out like a sales team and executing on like a more to get more lead gen or whatever, and you don't already build in the cost of that sales team, we need to have a conversation about the soundness of your strategies, right? Like your models have to account for the cost of your growth strategies,
Right.
right? As otherwise, you're going to buy a company and end up going on podcasts and telling everybody to buy bigger because you didn't buy big enough, which I think is why everybody's telling everybody to buy as big as you can, because they simply didn't buy enough, big enough to support their initiatives. And
Mhm.
so that needs to be built into your models. You need to be buying enough earnings to support your growth strategies. Otherwise, you won't be able to grow the way you want to. I'll step off my
Great.
soapbox.
No, that's a great. I wasn't aware that J curve, that definition of J curve. So that's great. Okay. And I just want to highlight one thing you said there, Chelsea, about in the lab, there's the break even analysis. You started the answer by saying that. I think it's the most important point. Really, it's not about the absolute number that you should test. Is it a 10% decline or a 25% decline? Is it after 6 months or 18 months? You really want to find out what the number is that causes the business to dip into the red, out of
Correct.
profitability, and we're losing money, and know that number first, and then start asking yourself, well, how realistic is it that let's say it's 12%. How realistic is it that this business dips 12%? Does that seem likely during the J curve? Is that maybe just a natural swing of the business? So every other year the business isn't profitable, et cetera. So find that number. That's your real kind of North Star number, or North Star to avoid number.
Yep.
Great. Okay, let's do one or two more, Chelsea, and then we'll wrap. Here's a good one. With the first day announcement, the seller is also announcing their departure. Many Acquiring Minds episodes where we hear about tears, seller crying in front of their employees. How do you balance that downer with your introduction?
Oh, I don't think it's a downer, right? You have to recognize that it's actually a beautiful moment, right? Where they got to go full circle with the business that they bought and built, and you just tap into it. It should also be an emotional moment for you. You're stepping in as an owner, right, of this company to transition. And so I wouldn't say you don't have, there's no downer about it, right? There's a beauty in the transition of ownership that you just need to embrace, right? And in your own excitement, and honor the legacy, right? They've just built something beautiful that you wanted to buy, right? And now you get to take the torch from them and continue on. And so, if anything, it's not about counterbalancing the downerness. It's about taking the moment to be vulnerable with your new workforce and express gratitude, right? And being a part of this experience with them, and really just get them excited about now what you're going to do with them, right?
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't think that it just because somebody's crying in the workforce. I know, like, from a corporate level, we're taught that that's not appropriate, but in small businesses, like, it's okay to be vulnerable, right? And anybody that's familiar with reciprocity and the psychology of reciprocity and vulnerability, you will gain credibility. I think it's part of why our brand is so strong in the lab, right? Because we are very vulnerable, right? We're not here to make it sound pretty. We're here to be honest about what you're facing and be a partner for you as you do this, right? And so you should probably position yourself the same way, right? It's a scary thing you're doing, but it's super freaking exciting, right? And you couldn't be more excited about continuing the wonderful things that these people have done. Um, so I don't know, that's my
That
answer.
was a beautiful answer, Chelsea. You should clip that and put it on social media. Even though you hate social media.
I do. I'm really bad
That
at
was
it.
that was
Oh.
great. No, it was a great response. Last question. It's such pardon my French, shit show during the transition. So much to do. So much aside from all of the EQ uh, related things that you're managing, psychology, people's emotions, expectations, etc. All that tactical stuff, payroll being exhibit A. Have you seen a model where a business buyer searcher brings on like an intern or just a right-hand man or woman to just provide another pair of hands and arms for a time to execute on all this stuff?
Not in this world, but yeah, in other transactions, right? So in my old life, right, you have a PMO, or an IMO,
What's that stand for?
integration office, or I don't actually know what the PMO, project management office, probably, but like we were an IMO, where you did have a whole team of people to make sure it was being done right. So that's a standard practice in large deals. And so I almost feel like this is half baked in my own brain. It could be a horrible idea. I don't have enough time to think through if I would actually recommend this to a member or not. So like anyone listening, please know this could be a horrible idea. But I almost feel like having a chief of staff could be really helpful to you in the preliminary transition, because it would give you that thought partner, that person that can kind of help you, but it's another expense that you have to be very mindful about, right? If you're not familiar with the chief of staff, look it up. It's a great role. It's actually, so I work as Walker's chief of staff for all of his other projects. It's somebody, it's not like an executive assistant, right? It's somebody with more of a project management, strategic background, a lot of consulting backgrounds, will kind of act in that role. So I don't hate the idea, to be honest. You'd have to be very, very delicate about how you introduce that.
And I meant not a permanent role, but
Correct.
for a 3-month stint. You could imagine
Correct.
there's so many people who are coming out of business school or school trying to buy a business. You could imagine it being internish almost, that this is what somebody, you don't like that.
It depends.
Yeah.
It depends, right? So how you introduce people creates, again, impressions matter, creates the way they're viewed, and in turn will set guardrails around how well they can be effective. And so it just depends on what you see that person needing to be capable of and being able to support you in. If it's literally just like a paper pusher and somebody to document your to-dos, just hire a VA, right? Record your stuff, have them transcribe it. Intern in most industries is viewed as like a student. You're
Yeah.
not gonna get a lot of like, they're not gonna be able to do anything to like actually execute on something for you. And so then it's like, why do you have them? It feels like just using AI to like keep you organized would be smarter use of your time.
Mm.
But a chief of staff would be somebody that could actually push forward a lot of the transitional stuff, help keep, like help push forward the strategic initiatives that you come up with, right? Process
Yeah.
improvement, have the interviews, have the discussions, lead the survey in a way, or like lead the surveying process in a way where there's still transparency and vulnerability because they're not talking to you directly. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't think an
Well,
intern would be the right move, though. That's Chelsea's opinion.
Well, and to be clear, I wasn't suggesting that you broadcast to your team you're buying that this person is an intern. So it wasn't a public title, but point taken. But like one of the things that I constantly hear is how like just moving accounts, like the phones from one to
Correct.
another,
It's a
takes
pain in the ass.
an inordinate amount of time when you, business buyer, have much higher value, strategic stuff you should be working on. But this is like, what is the Eisenhower matrix? This is urgent but not important, but it is urgent, so you have to do it. So the important stuff gets pushed a little bit. But you could imagine somebody who's younger and eventually sees himself buying a business, maybe just anyway. I've made my point.
Well,
But them
and just
sitting on the phone with the whomever while you're doing the other stuff, and they're getting value of it because they are still witnessing a transition firsthand, and you could imagine them seeing that's very valuable. Anyway.
the challenge with that, though, Will, just to be clear, is the
Yeah.
competencies required to actually execute on that strategy requires a certain level of autonomy and knowledge that you're inferring. So you would have to teach them how to do that for them to be able to do it. It's typically how
Mm.
interns work, right? It's like I'll show you and then you do one and then you go do things on your own. This isn't that situation, which is why I went more with the chief. And you can get fractional chief of staffs to work with you for 10 hours a week or whatever.
Mm.
But there's a
Oh,
level of authority that they function very like where it could be like, I need you to transfer this bank account over, and they can go do that, right?
yeah.
There's no instruction required from you because they already know what they're doing. An intern, I think, in my years, and I've created internship programs at every company I've ever worked with, because I really love that role. It is not the right role for that.
Okay.
It will actually,
Noted.
it will create a layer of burden on you that then up the transition even more, because now there's somebody else needing something from you in order to
Yeah.
do something.
Fractional chief of staff. Didn't know that existed. Great.
Yeah.
We got to let people go, Chelsea. We're over. Thank you for the extra time. As always,
Sure.
Reminder, everyone, you will get this recording in the slides by email. You will not get the toolkit. If you want the toolkit, email Chelsea and ask for it. Her email is coming in the chat. By then build. That, and then if you want to book a strategy call with Chelsea or her team about joining the lab, put your email in the Q&A now in the next 30 seconds, and they'll reach out. Any other logistics?
Any questions that I didn't answer? There were 138 last time, so like I'm hesitant to say this time. But any questions I didn't answer, I will try my best to answer, probably via writing. It's too hard to do videos now because there's so many of them. And so I'll send that out as well via email to anybody that registered that submitted questions that I didn't answer yet.
Great. Very, very nice of you to give us even more of your time, Chelsea. Okay, Chelsea Wood, Acquisition Lab. Thank you for yet another stellar presentation, a really important and interesting and high stakes topic. So I'm sure this one, that's why almost 800 people registered for this.
Good. I hope it's helpful. Reach out with questions.
It was indeed. Thank you, Chelsea. Thank you, everyone, for coming. This ends the webinar.
Thank you.